Abdullah ibn Zubayr radiallahu anhu became so weak that many of them could no longer carry their swords. They had nothing to eat, and no only thing that they had to drink was Zamzam. And Al-Hujjaj ibn Yusuf was saying that whoever leaves the side of Abdullah ibn Zubayr and comes to me, I will give them protection. And he was saying to Abdullah ibn Zubayr, he was saying, Abdullah, for you, you can go wherever you want. Leave Makkah and go wherever you want. Or if you don't want to do that, then come to Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, and he will do whatever he wants with you. And then your final option is that you fight to the death. And the narrations mention that one by one, all of the men of Abdullah ibn Zubayr left his side. The narrations mention that in one day, 10,000 men left his side. And he was literally by himself. He had a handful of men left with him. And then he decided to go and visit his mother, Asma radiallahu anha. And very rarely, wallahi, very rarely has history captured such a discussion. The reality is that no speaker, no orator can depict the emotions and the iman which was prevalent in that room that day. And he went to his mother, and she was over 100 years old, and she was blind. And when he entered the room, he gave her salam, and she replied to his salam. And then she asked him, where have the men of Al-Hujjaj reached? And he said, Inna fil mawti la raha. He said, oh my mother, in death I will find peace and tranquility. And then he said, oh my mother, all my companions have left me, hatta waladi wa ahli, until my own family and my children have left my side, and I only have a handful of people around me. وَقَوْمٌ يُؤْتِينِ مَا أُرِيدُ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. And the people are ready to give me whatever I want from this dunya, meaning that they are allowing me to go wherever I want. فَمَاذَا رَأْيُكَ? What is your opinion, O my mother? And his mother said, Ya bunayya anta a'lamu bi nafsik. She said, oh my son, you are more knowledgeable regarding your circumstances than me. And then she said, but I do say that if you know that you are on the truth, then die like your companions. Subhanallah, this is the coolness of her eyes. This is her child, and she's telling him that if you are on the truth, then die like your companions died. When she would define her child, she would say, قَوَّامٌ صَوَّامٌ بَرًّا لِوَالِدَيْهِ, that he would pray profusely, that he would fast profusely, and he would always obey his parents. And she's telling the coolness of her eyes. She's saying that if you know that you are on the truth, then die like your companions died. وَإِن كُنْتَ تُرِيدُ الدُّنْيَا فَبِئْسَ الْعَبْدُ أَنْتَ. And she said, if you want the dunya, then you are the most wretched of people. You are the most wretched of people, because you have wasted yourself and you have wasted your companion. وَكَمْ خُلُودُكَ فِي الدُّنْيَا. And how long are you going to live in this dunya? How long are you going to live in this dunya? And then she said, if you say that you are on the truth, but when your companions left you, you became weak. Then she said, هَذَا لَيْسَ فِعْلُ الْأَحْرَارِ وَأَهْلِ الدِّينِ. She said, this is not the action of free men and the people of deen. وَكَمْ خُلُودُكَ فِي الدُّنْيَا. And how long are you going to live in this dunya? And then he said, oh my mother, إِنِّي أَخَافُ. He said, oh my mother, I'm scared that if they kill me, then they will mutilate my body and they will hang me up. And subhanallah, she said really words which exemplify the iman of this people. She said, Ya bunayya, inna sha'at al-mazbuhata la yu'limha as-salkh. She said, oh my son, a slaughtered goat doesn't feel the pain when it is skinned. A slaughtered goat doesn't feel the pain when it is skinned. And then when she said this, he stood up and he kissed her upon his forehead. And he said, oh my mother, Wallahi hadha ra'i. He said, I swear by Allah, this is my opinion. And I have no desire to live in this dunya, for my aspirations is the hereafter. And all my life I have stood up for the truth. But all I wanted to know is your opinion, so that your opinion strengthens my opinion. And then his mother said, come closer, my son. And when he came closer to her, she embraced him. And when she embraced him, she felt that he had some metal armor on. And she said, oh my son, what is this? For people who want shahada, don't wear this. And he said, oh my mother, I only did this to comfort you. And she said, my son, take it off. And then she said, oh my son, tie your izar, tie your belt, So when you fall, your aura is not exposed. SubhanAllah, she's sending her son to an imminent death, but she is still concerned about every facet of his deen. And then she said, "Oh my son, fight with bravery, for you are the son of Zubayr, and you are the grandson of Abu Bakr, and your grandmother was Safiya radiyallahu anhum." And the narrations mention that on that day, Abdullah ibn Zubayr went out and he fought like 1,000 men. And why shouldn't he fight like 1,000 men? For he was the son of Zubayr radiallahu anhu. And Zubayr radiallahu anhu was that person. Upon an occasion, Umar radiallahu anhu, he sent 1,000 men to war. And on the head of those 1,000 men, he sent Zubayr radiallahu anhu. And he wrote a letter to that governor. He said, "I am sending you 1,000 men. And at the head of these 1,000 men is Zubayr. He himself is equivalent to 1,000 men." And the narrations mention that Abdullah ibn Zubayr, from noon until evening, he fought. And one by one, all his men died until he was left by himself. And he will repel huge numbers of men until finally they threw a rock upon him. And then he was on the floor and he was still fighting. And then they cut off his leg. And finally they martyred him. And the narrations mention that when they martyred him, Makkah erupted with crying. Subhanallah, the day he was born, Medina erupted with happiness. And the day he died, Makkah erupted with crying. And Hujjaj ibn Yusuf as-Saqafi stood up and he said, "Oh people, know that Abdullah was the best of people. But when he rebelled against the Caliph, then he had to be removed from Makkah. For Adam was best of people. And when he rebelled against the commands of Allah, he was removed from Jannah. And Adam is better than Zubair. And Jannah is better than Makkah." See, twisted people. See, the very nature of twisted people is that they will always give you twisted analogies. And there was no man who was more twisted than Al-Hujjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi. He was the most twisted of people. And then the narrations mention that Hujjaj, he came to the mother of Abdullah ibn Zubayr radiallahu anhu, and he wanted to break her resolve. And he said, "How has Allah dealt with his enemy?" And Asma radiallahu anhu, these were people who weren't scared of death. He said, "You may have corrupted this dunya, but he has corrupted your akhirah." And then Hujjaj said, "I heard they call you Dhat and Taqain, the one with the 2 waist belts." And she said, "Yes, they call me the one with the 2 waist belts, because I took off my waist belt and I tore it in two, and I gave one to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I kept one myself." But then she said, "Let me tell you one thing. I heard the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say that from Saqif, 2 people will emanate. One will be a tyrant, and the other will be a liar. The liar that we have seen, and the tyrant and the man who is bloodthirsty is you." She said these were people who were full of iman, because they had sat at the feet of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They weren't scared of death. They weren't scared of death. He thought that he could break her resolve, but she gave him a slap in his face. And then what they did is that they beheaded Abdullah ibn Zubayr and they stuck his body up. And the men of Hujjaj were saying, "Allahu Akbar, Takbir, Allahu Akbar, Takbir, Allahu Akbar." And Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he went by and we heard them saying takbir. And he turned towards the body of Abdullah ibn Zubayr radiallahu anhu. And he said, "I was there the day that Abdullah was born. And I am here the day he has died. And I heard those who said takbir on the day he was born. And I have heard those who have said takbir on the day he has died. And I swear by Allah that those who said takbir on the day he was born were far greater than those who have said takbir today. Were far greater than those who have said takbir today." And then the narration mentioned that there was a beautiful fragrance coming from his mutilated body. And what the men of Hujjaj did is they tied a cat around his waist. A dead cat. And the narration mentioned that the fragrance was so beautiful that even over the stench of the dead cat you could smell this fragrance. You could smell this fragrance. And then they went to Al-Hujjaj and they said, "Hujjaj, now take his body down. It's been up for days." And Hujjaj said, "I swear by Allah, I swear by Allah, I will not take it down until Asma comes and begs me." And when they told Asma radiallahu anha, she said, "Take me to where my body is, body of my son is." Because she was blind at the time. And they took her to where the body of her son was. And she made dua for her son. And then she said words which history records. She said, "Ama ana li hadha al-faris an yanzil." Said, "Ama ana li hadha al-faris an yanzil." Said, "Isn't it time that this knight of Allah was allowed to come off his horse? Isn't it time that this knight was allowed to come off his horse? And when they told Hujjaj what she had said, he felt so little that he knew he had lost the battle. And then he brought the body of Abdullah ibn Zubayr radiallahu anhu down. See, this was a man who lived and died for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How much time do I have left? See, these were men who lived and died for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the unfortunate reality is that me and you, we are brave for all the wrong things. But if there's one thing that we are not brave for, and that is the haqq and the truth. Because we have made role models those people who are not deserving of being role models. How many people here, really, how many people here have ever heard the name of Abdullah ibn Zubayr before this day? How many people know anything about the life of Abdullah ibn Zubayr? We know the names of the children of Beckham and Victoria. We know all the names of the football teams that we like, Celtic and Rangers. But how many of us actually know about those people who should be our role models? And this is why the Muslim Ummah is in the state that we're in today. We know about everybody else, but we don't know anything about the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we have made other people our role models. If you look into the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, look, if you look at kindness and good people and forbearing people, you will see many in humanity. But wallahi, you will never see a man who was more forgiving than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, more caring than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a Jew as a neighbor. And what the Jew would do on a daily basis is that he would put thorns in the path of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam every night, on the hope that when the Prophet ﷺ would go and relieve himself, these thorns would prick the Prophet ﷺ. And upon occasion, the Prophet ﷺ heard that the son of the Jew was ill. And the Prophet ﷺ hurried to the house of this Jew. And he knocked on the door. And the father, whose life ambition it was to harm the Prophet ﷺ, opened the door. And what must have gone through his mind when he saw the Prophet ﷺ? And then the Prophet ﷺ came into the house and he sat by the bed of this child. And he said, "Oh my son, bear witness that there is no God but Allah. And I am His messenger. And I will bear witness and I will intercede for you on the day of judgment." And this child began to look at the father. The child began to look at the father. And the father, whose life ambition it was to harm the Prophet ﷺ, when he saw the character of the Prophet ﷺ, his heart melted. And he said, "Oh my son, obey whatever Muhammad tells you to do." And the child recited the kalima, and shortly after this he passed away. And the narration mentioned the Prophet ﷺ left the house and he was in an elated mood and he was slapping his thighs and he was saying, "Oh, praise be to Allah who has made me a source of removing one person from eternal doom into eternal success." This was the role model. This was the character of the Prophet ﷺ. And really, you compare that today. Who have we made our role models? Look at those who are even practicing. You know, how often do people actually rub off on us? How often do people see our character and say, "Yes, that's how I want to be"? Those are even practicing. How often do you hear complaints from brothers who are practicing that their family say, "Look, if this is religion, if this is Islam, the way he practices it, we don't want nothing over from this religion. For his character stinks." Because he wants to shove his ideology down the throats of other people. For 15, 20 years, he's been whining and dining. And Allah finally gives him hidayat. And then he comes home and he wants to revolutionize his home in a day. It doesn't happen like that. That's why you have to have sabr. If you look at the way the Prophet ﷺ dealt with his family, the love and affection that he showed to his family, which brought them all closer. The Prophet ﷺ, when he was at Bibi Halima, when he was suckling, he had a sister through just breastfeeding called Shima. And the Prophet ﷺ, 50 years later, the Prophet ﷺ heard that Shima was coming through Medina. And the Prophet ﷺ requested that she be brought to Masjid Nabi ﷺ. And she was a kafira, mushrika at the time. And the Prophet ﷺ, when she entered the masjid, he took off his cloak and he placed it on the floor. And Shima, she began to shake. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Oh Shima, why are you shaking for?" And she said, "Oh Muhammad, I heard that you are a king now." And the Prophet ﷺ said, "No Shima, like you are the daughter of a poor lady, I too am the son of a poor lady.